I am Maya, 32 years old, and I just experienced the ultimate family betrayal. When my 7-year-old son and I returned from visiting his late father's grave, we found his bedroom completely empty. Every piece of furniture, every cherished memory gone. When I asked where his things were, my sister Chloe just laughed. I took the room, she smirked, tapping a measuring tape against her hand. I sold everything and got a great price for it too. My mother, Beatrice, stepped into the hallway and chuckled right beside her, claiming it was only fair since Chloe was pregnant and needed a nursery. As my son clung to my legs, crying in absolute distress, I did not shed a single tear. I just turned and walked away. But what they did not know was that their little garage sale was about to trigger a federal investigation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your child from toxic family members. The drive back from the cemetery had been quiet and heavy, with the familiar grief that always accompanied the anniversary of my husband's passing. My son Malik sat in the back seat, his small fingers tracing the edges of a photograph of his father. Malik has Asperger syndrome. He processes the world differently, relying on strict routines, specific sensory environments, and the comforting presence of his belongings to feel safe. His bedroom was his absolute sanctuary. We had spent years carefully curating that space with noise-canceling panels, specialized lighting, his intricate art supplies, and the antique instruments his father had left behind. When I turned the key in the lock of our front door, I expected to be greeted by the usual Sunday afternoon quiet. I had graciously allowed my mother, my younger sister Chloe, and her husband Trevor to stay in my spacious Atlanta home after Trevor experienced what he called a temporary setback in his finance career. I thought I was doing the right thing by supporting my family. I thought providing a roof over their heads would foster some kind of gratitude or at least basic respect. I was completely wrong. The moment we stepped inside, Malik immediately dropped his backpack. His highly sensitive ears picked up on a change in the acoustics of the house. He began to hum a low repetitive note, a self-soothing mechanism he used whenever he felt anxious. I took his hand and led him down the hallway toward his room, hoping he could just lie down and decompress after an emotional morning. I pushed open his bedroom door and my breath hitched in my throat. The room was entirely stripped to the bare drywall. His custom sensory bed was gone. His drafting table where he painted for hours was missing. The heavy blackout curtains had been ripped down, letting harsh afternoon sunlight flood the space. Even the soft blue rug he loved to sit on had vanished. The room echoed completely devoid of life, stripped of every single item that made it a safe haven for my child. Standing right in the center of the bare floor was my 29-year-old sister Chloe. She was wearing a designer maternity dress, casually pulling a metal tape measure across the length of the wall. She did not even look startled when we walked in. She just rolled her eyes and let the tape measure snap back into its casing. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Where are Malik's things?" Chloe placed a hand on her slightly swelling belly and sighed as if my presence was an incredible inconvenience to her day. "Relax, Maya. I took the room. Trevor and I need a proper nursery for the baby, and this space gets the best morning light." "You took the room," I repeated, stepping firmly in front of Malik, who had started to rock back and forth on his heels, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. "This is my son's bedroom. Where is his furniture? Where are his art supplies? Where are his instruments?" Chloe laughed, a high-pitched grating sound that bounced off the empty walls. "I sold them, obviously. I called a local clearance crew yesterday while you two were out moping at the cemetery. They brought a truck and cleared it all out. I got a really good price for all that junk, actually. Enough to put a down payment on the smart crib Trevor wants." My blood turned to ice. "You sold my son's belongings." Before I could step toward her, the floorboards creaked in the hallway, and my mother, Beatrice, walked in. She was holding a mug of tea, looking perfectly relaxed. Her hair was freshly pressed, her nails freshly manicured, likely paid for with the very money she had scrounged from my bank accounts over the years. "Do not yell at your pregnant sister, Maya," my mother scolded, stepping right over the spot where Malik's favorite rug used to be. "Chloe is bringing new life into this family. She needs a stress-free environment." Trevor is very particular about how the nursery should look, and we all know how hard he works. We have to accommodate him. Accommodate him, I asked, staring at my mother in pure disbelief. Trevor does not even have a job right now. You are all living in my house. You do not get to auction off my child's life to fund a nursery for a man who refuses to pay rent. My mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. This is family property, Maya. We share in this family. Trevor is a white man from a good background. He is just going through a transition. He needs to feel respected in his own home. And honestly, Malik barely uses half the things in here. He just sits in the corner and hums. A normal child needs this room. A healthy baby needs this space. It is only fair. The casual cruelty of her words was a physical blow. She had always worshipped Trevor, placing him on a pedestal simply because of his race and his supposed Wall Street pedigree, treating him like royalty while treating her own black neurodivergent grandson like a burden. She had constantly diminished Malik's autism, calling it a lack of discipline, and now she was standing in his empty room calling him abnormal to his face. Behind me, Malik let out a sharp, agonizing wail. The sensory shock of the empty, echoing room combined with the loud voices and the sudden loss of his entire world triggered a massive overload. He dropped to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest, and clapped his hands tightly over his ears. He was screaming a raw, terrified sound that tore through my heart. He rocked violently, his eyes squeezed shut, entirely overwhelmed by the violation of his sanctuary. I immediately dropped to my knees beside him. I ignored my mother and sister, completely focusing entirely on my son. I wrapped my arms around his trembling body, applying deep pressure, the way his occupational therapist had taught us. I murmured quietly into his ear, rocking with him, shielding him from the harsh light and the toxic presence of the two women standing above us. Look at him, Chloe sneered from above. This is exactly why he does not need a big room. Put him in the basement, Maya. Trevor needs quiet to do his day trading anyway, and that screaming is going to stress my baby out. I kept my focus on Malik, breathing in sync with him until his screams slowly subsided into exhausted, ragged hiccups. I kissed his forehead, pulling him up so his face was hidden against my shoulder. I stood up slowly, holding my son's weight. I felt no tears in my eyes. I felt no urge to scream or throw things. A terrifying, absolute calmness washed over my entire body. It was the kind of calm that precedes total devastation. I looked directly at Chloe. I did not raise my voice. I asked one very specific question. The wooden case that was under his bed. The heavy oak one with the brass clasps. Did you sell that too? Chloe rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. I sold everything, Maya, I told you. Some guy gave me $3,000 for the whole lot. Trevor was thrilled. It covers the nursery paint and the new flooring perfectly. Now please take him out of here, I need to call the contractors. $3,000. They sold the entire contents of his room for $3,000. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had bullied the quiet, accommodating single mother into submission once again. They assumed the oak case under the bed just held an old broken toy. They did not know that the oak case held a fully authenticated, pristine 18th century violin, a family heirloom from my late husband. A piece of history that was legally registered, heavily insured, and valued at $250,000. I looked at my mother, who was sipping her tea with a satisfied smirk, finally getting the perfect nursery for her favorite daughter and her prized son-in-law. I looked at Chloe standing arrogantly in the center of the stolen room. Okay, I said quietly. I tightened my grip on Malik, turned my back on them, and walked out of the room. I walked straight down the hallway, listening to their muffled laughter behind me. I did not stop to argue. I did not waste my breath begging for basic human decency. They had just crossed a line from which there was absolutely no return. They thought they had claimed a victory. They had no idea they had just sealed their own spectacular ruin. I carried Malik down the hallway, his small body still trembling against my chest. I rubbed his back, murmuring the rhythmic counting sequences his therapist taught us, trying to ground him in a reality that had just been violently upended. The living room opened up before us, a space I had meticulously designed with mid-century modern pieces and warm earth tones. Now it looked like a staging ground for a hostile takeover. Trevor was sprawled across my custom velvet sofa. He had his shoes propped right on the edge of the reclaimed wood coffee table. In his right hand, he swirled a crystal tumbler filled with an amber liquid I instantly recognized. It was the Pappy Van Winkle bourbon my late husband had bought to celebrate our 5th anniversary. A bottle I had never opened, keeping it sealed on the top shelf of the study as a monument to a man who was no longer here. Trevor was sipping it like it was cheap tap water, completely oblivious to the sacred nature of what he was consuming. He looked up, his pale eyes catching the afternoon light, completely devoid of empathy. He swirled the bourbon again, the ice clinking loudly, a sound that made Malik flinch and bury his face deeper into my neck. "Do not make such a huge deal out of this," Maya Trevor said. His voice had that grating, unearned authority of a man who spent his days pretending to be a Wall Street tycoon while currently unemployed. He took a slow sip, savoring the stolen liquor. "That kid has too much junk anyway. We did you a favor. I took all those dusty old cases and weird comic books down to the flea market on 8th Street. The guy there gave me $3,000 cash for the whole lot. You should have seen the look on his face, thinking he was robbing me." Trevor chuckled, shaking his head. $3,000. That is exactly what Chloe and I needed for that snooze smart crib she has been wanting. Plus the matching organic mattress setup. You should actually feel honored, Maya. You are finally contributing something useful to this family, instead of just taking up space. Taking up space. I paid the mortgage on this 4-bedroom house. I paid the property taxes. I paid the utilities that kept the central air running so Trevor could lounge comfortably in his designer sweatpants. Yet in his mind, because I was a black single mother who dressed in simple cardigans and spent my weekends at estate sales rather than country clubs, I was the charity case. My mother had spent the last 2 years feeding his delusion, treating him like the great white savior of our family, simply because he once held a junior analyst position at a mediocre brokerage firm. She worshipped his perceived status, allowing him to walk all over her own flesh and blood, just to say she had a finance executive for a son-in-law. Trevor set the crystal glass down on the wood table without a coaster, leaving a wet ring of condensation on the polished surface. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, adopting a tone of magnanimous patience. "Look, Beatrice and I have been talking. Your mother agrees that Chloe needs a stress-free environment for the baby. Having Malik running around making those weird noises, throwing tantrums because a chair got moved, it is not healthy for my pregnant wife. We need stability." He pointed a finger toward the hallway leading to the kitchen and the door beyond it. "We are going to need the master suite too. My home office setup requires the extra square footage, especially now that I am day trading crypto to build our portfolio. You and the boy can take the finished basement. It has a bathroom down there. It is perfectly fine for your situation. Frankly, you are lucky I am still allowing you to stay under this roof at all. Most men would have kicked their wife's deadbeat sister to the curb months ago." Chloe strolled into the living room right on cue, munching on a handful of green grapes. She stood behind Trevor, resting a manicured hand on his shoulder. "He is right, Maya. The basement is huge. You can set up a little corner for Malik down there where his noise will not bother the baby. Besides, Trevor needs the master bath. The lighting in there is so much better for his morning routine." My mother trailed in behind her, hovering near the entryway. She crossed her arms, adopting her best church lady posture, the one she used when she was about to deliver a sermon on family values. "Maya, you have to look at the bigger picture," she lectured. "Trevor is the man of the house now. He is providing the vision for this family's future. You have been struggling ever since your husband passed, scraping by with whatever it is you do with those old dusty things. Trevor has an actual financial background. You should be grateful he is willing to manage the household assets. A good Christian woman knows how to step back and let the man lead." The sheer audacity of their collective delusion hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They truly believed they owned my home. They truly believed the power of attorney. My mother had somehow weaponized, gave them absolute dominion over my life and my property. I felt Malik's heart racing against my ribs, a frantic, terrified rhythm. My son needed a safe space, and right now this living room was a war zone filled with predators who smiled while they stripped us to the bone. I looked at the wet ring. The bourbon glass was leaving on my coffee table. I looked at Trevor's smug, self-satisfied face, so utterly convinced of his own superiority. I thought about the $3,000 he bragged about getting from a flea market vendor. I thought about the profound ignorance required to look at a masterpiece and see only garbage. They thought I was just a junk collector. They had no idea I was the director of an elite estate liquidation firm, managing assets for the wealthiest families in the state. I knew property law, asset recovery, and federal theft statutes better than I knew my own reflection. The basement, I said, my voice eerily calm, completely devoid of the hysterical reaction Trevor was clearly hoping to provoke. Trevor smirked, leaning back into the velvet cushions with a victorious sigh. Yes, the basement. Tonight. Chloe has an interior decorator coming tomorrow morning to start measuring the upstairs for the nursery and my new office. I want your stuff cleared out by dinner. Do not make us ask twice. I did not scream. I did not throw the tumbler of bourbon in his face. I did not remind my mother that she was the one who begged me to let them move in when Trevor lost his job and Chloe maxed out her credit cards. I simply adjusted my hold on my son, rubbing a soothing circle into his back. Fine, I said smoothly, meeting Trevor's arrogant stare without blinking. We will move to the basement tonight. Chloe giggled, pressing a kiss to Trevor's cheek. See, babe. I told you she would eventually learn her place. She just needed a firm hand. Trevor looked slightly disappointed that I had not put up a fight, but his arrogance quickly masked it. Good. Glad you are finally respecting the hierarchy around here. Now, if you do not mind, I have some market trends to analyze. I turned toward the kitchen, my face perfectly neutral. I let him have his petty victory. I let him enjoy the stolen bourbon and the illusion of power. Because Trevor had no idea that the dusty old wooden case he carelessly dumped for $3,000 did not belong in a flea market. He had no idea he had just sold a federally registered antique, a documented piece of musical history. He had no idea he had just committed a massive felony that carried a mandatory federal prison sentence, and I was going to let him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could before I pushed him in. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I carried my son down into the damp, heavy air of the basement. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees the moment we crossed the threshold. This was the space my mother and sister deemed appropriate for a grieving widow and an autistic child, a windowless concrete box filled with forgotten storage bins and the relentless mechanical hum of the central heating unit. I found an old futon pushed against the far wall. I laid my coat over the dusty mattress and gently lowered Malik onto it. He was completely exhausted from the sensory overload upstairs. I curled my body around his, pulling him close, and began humming a low, steady melody. It was the same classical piece his father used to play for him every night. Slowly, the frantic rhythm of his breathing began to steady. His clenched fists relaxed and he slipped into a deep, heavy sleep. I carefully untangled myself from his grasp and sat on a cold folding chair across the room. The absolute darkness of the basement mirrored the cold, calculated silence wrapping around my mind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The harsh blue light of the screen illuminated my face in the shadows. I did not open my bank app or text a friend for sympathy. I bypassed all the standard icons and tapped on a hidden encrypted application buried in a secure folder. The screen prompted me for a biometric scan, followed by a 16-digit alphanumeric passcode. I typed it in flawlessly. My family truly believed I spent my days rummaging through estate sales for cheap trinkets. They thought my quiet demeanor was a symptom of weakness and poverty. They had no idea the level of security required for my actual profession. When you manage asset liquidation for some of the wealthiest estates in the country, you do not leave anything to chance. That applied to my personal life most of all. The app loaded, displaying a highly detailed satellite map of the greater Atlanta area. I tapped a search protocol, activating a signal to a micro GPS tracking chip. I had personally embedded that chip deep inside the lining of the heavy oak case Trevor had so proudly bragged about selling. Trevor assumed that case held a dusty, worthless instrument taking up space in Malik's closet. He thought he had outsmarted a naive single mother by dumping it for a quick payout. What that arrogant, unemployed finance bro failed to realize was that the violin inside that oak case was an 18th century Italian masterpiece. My late husband had spent 5 years tracking it down through private European collectors. It was an authenticated, pristine instrument that belonged in a museum But my husband had purchased it to secure Malik's financial future. It was legally registered, thoroughly documented, and protected by a massive federal insurance policy. I watched the screen intently as the application searched for the signal. A pulsing green dot suddenly materialized on the digital map. I used 2 fingers to zoom in, magnifying the streets and buildings surrounding the beacon. I stared at the location, a humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. The signal was absolutely nowhere near the 8th Street flea market. Trevor had lied. He did not casually drop the case off to a random vendor for $3,000. The green dot was pinging from a highly secured, unmarked warehouse district on the industrial outskirts of the city. Because of my position at Aegis Heritage, I knew exactly what that specific facility was used for. It was a holding vault frequently utilized by black market antiquities dealers and underground auction houses to store unverified or stolen high-value items before moving them across state lines. Trevor had not just been careless, he had been desperate. He had actively sought out a shadow broker to offload stolen goods likely to cover the massive hidden gambling debts I suspected he was hiding from my sister. He thought he had walked away with a clean $3,000 in cash to buy baby furniture. He had no concept of the invisible federal tripwires he had just sprinted across. I sat back in the cold folding chair, the glow of the phone reflecting in my eyes. The pieces of the board were perfectly aligned. My mother and sister had conspired to strip my child of his sanctuary. They had handed the keys of my life over to a man who thought his skin color and his fake Wall Street persona gave him the right to strip me bare. They thought they had won the house, the money, and the power. I tapped the screen one last time, locking the GPS coordinates into a permanent tracking log. I did not feel sad. I did not feel betrayed anymore. I only felt the terrifying absolute precision of a predator watching its prey walk directly into a cage. $3,000, I whispered to the empty dark room, my voice steady and cold. Congratulations, Trevor. You just sold a federally insured antique worth $250,000. The morning light struggled to filter through the tiny dirty window at the top of the basement wall. I had not slept a single minute. I spent the entire night finalizing my strategy, organizing digital files, and watching that green dot pulse steadily on my screen. By the time I heard the heavy footsteps of Trevor walking across the hardwood floors right above my head, my plan was completely bulletproof. I changed into a simple, unassuming beige sweater and dark jeans. I had to maintain the illusion of the defeated, exhausted sister just a little bit longer. I woke Malik, gently helping him dress and preparing his noise-canceling headphones. We walked up the basement stairs together. The kitchen was a chaotic mess of entitlement. Chloe was sitting at the marble island flipping through a luxury baby catalog, while Trevor aggressively tapped on his laptop pretending to analyze market trends. My mother Beatrice was humming a gospel tune as she poured herself a cup of my expensive organic coffee. I walked straight up to the island, keeping my posture slightly slouched, playing my role perfectly. Trevor, I said, my voice intentionally quiet and hesitant. I need to ask you about the man you sold Malik's things to. I need the receipt or the location of his stall. I want to use my own savings to buy the violin back. It was Malik's favorite. Trevor did not even look up from his screen. He just let out a loud, obnoxious sigh, as if my very existence was draining his valuable time. I told you, Maya, it was a cash deal. No receipts, no names. The guy is probably halfway to Florida by now, selling that junk to some other sucker. Let it go. My mother slammed her coffee mug onto the counter, glaring at me with deep disappointment. Maya, stop harassing your brother-in-law. He is trying to work. You should be down on your knees thanking him for bringing some actual cash into this house instead of hoarding garbage. I already told you we are transferring the deed of this house into Chloe and Trevor's name so they can have a proper foundation for the baby. I looked at my mother, perfectly masking the cold calculation in my eyes. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket and placed it gently on the marble counter. You mean this transfer? I asked. Beatrice snatched the paper up, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. Exactly. I used the power of attorney you signed for me last year to authorize the transfer. You have 1 week to pack the rest of your things and find a new place. Trevor is the man of the house now, and he needs the space to provide for my grandchild. She thought she had played a masterstroke. She thought she had legally evicted me from the home I had spent years paying off. She worshipped Trevor so blindly that she was willing to render her own flesh and blood homeless just to elevate a man who despised her. I did not argue. I did not snatch the paper back. I simply looked at the three of them, memorizing the profound arrogance radiating from their faces. You use the power of attorney. I repeated, making sure she confirmed it out loud. I absolutely did, my mother stated proudly, lifting her chin. And it is fully notarized. That is good to know, I replied softly. I turned away, grabbing my car keys from the hook by the door. I will start packing. As I walked out the front door, leaving them to their stolen comfort, I pulled my phone from my pocket. The power of attorney she had used was a bait document I had intentionally left accessible. The house was not owned by me personally. It was owned by a corporate trust managed by my liquidation firm. My mother had just committed deliberate real estate fraud, forging a transfer of corporate assets. She thought she had signed an eviction notice. She had actually just signed her own federal indictment. I sat in the driver's seat of my car with the engine idling and the air conditioning blasting against the oppressive Atlanta heat. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned a bruised shade of gray. I looked down at the piece of paper resting on the passenger seat. The fraudulent deed my mother had so proudly shoved in my face. The notary stamp was a clumsy forgery, likely purchased online by Chloe or Trevor. They truly believed they had executed a flawless legal maneuver. They thought transferring the deed was as simple as filling out a downloadable form and bullying me into submission. Before I could shift the car into gear, a sharp, aggressive knock rattled my driver's side window. I turned to see Trevor standing in my driveway. I was wearing a pristine golf polo and holding his phone like a weapon. Behind him, standing on the porch with her arms crossed and her chin raised in defiance, was my mother. I rolled down the window, letting the humid summer air mix with the cool interior of my car. "Do not even think about taking the smart fridge or the washer-dryer combo when you leave," Trevor said. His tone was casual, but laced with that signature entitlement he always carried. I looked up the model numbers. They increase the property value, and Chloe wants to keep them for the baby's formula and clothes. You can take your cheap thrift store furniture, but the high-end appliances stay. It is my house now. I will be taking inventory before you hand over the keys. I put the car in park and unbuckled my seatbelt. I pushed the door open, forcing Trevor to take a clumsy step backward to avoid being hit. I stepped out onto the concrete driveway, matching his arrogant stare with absolute unblinking silence. "I do not care about the appliances, Trevor," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I care about the items you stole from my autistic son. I need the name of the buyer. I need a phone number, a physical address, a license plate, anything. You claim you sold it at the 8th Street Market. Which vendor?" Trevor scoffed, running a hand through his hair and looking back at my mother as if seeking an audience for his performance. "Are you deaf, Maya? I told you it was a cash deal with some random guy. You are obsessing over literal garbage. You need to focus on packing your bags and getting out of my property. I am not playing detective for you just because your kid cannot handle a change in scenery." I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space. He instinctively stepped back again, his bravado faltering for a fraction of a second. "You did not sell a box of comic books and a wooden case to a random vendor for $3,000 in cash," I stated firmly. "Nobody at that flea market carries that kind of liquid cash for unverified goods. You sought out a specific buyer. You fenced stolen property. Give me the name Trevor. Do not you dare speak to your brother-in-law like he is a criminal in the middle of the street." My mother marched down the driveway, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the pavement. She inserted herself squarely between Trevor and me, her face contorted with self-righteous fury. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, completely ignoring the fact that we were standing outside the home I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears. "I is the man of this house," Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with that toxic church lady authority she loved to wield. "He is providing for your sister. He is building wealth for this family while you scavenge through dead people's belongings for a living. You have no right to interrogate him. You signed that power of attorney. You gave me the right to make financial decisions for your well-being, and I decided this house belongs to Chloe and Trevor. It is done." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the deep lines of resentment around her mouth, the desperate need for validation shining in her eyes. She was so blinded by her obsession with Trevor's whiteness and his fabricated Wall Street pedigree that she was willing to sacrifice her own grandson's sanctuary. Providing for this family, I asked, letting a sharp, humorless laugh escape my throat. Are we really going to stand in this driveway and pretend Trevor provides anything other than headaches and empty liquor bottles? He has been unemployed for 8 months, Mom. I pay the mortgage. I pay the electricity that keeps his monitors running so he can gamble away his severance pay on cryptocurrency. This is not about him providing. This is about your desperate need to show off a finance executive son-in-law to Pastor Williams and the Sunday congregation. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest, as if I had physically struck her. How dare you disrespect me and this family? Trevor brings class to this household. He comes from a good background. He is elevating us. Elevating us! I repeated, my voice rising just enough to echo off the brick facade of the house. Just like you elevated Chloe when you secretly drained $50,000 from my college savings account 3 years ago. Trevor looked surprised for a moment, glancing at his mother-in-law. Beatrice's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. Do not you bring the past into this, she stammered, looking around nervously to ensure none of the neighbors were listening to our dispute. I am bringing it into the present, I fired back, refusing to let her change the subject. I worked 3 shifts a day. I cleaned offices at night. I saved every single penny for my tuition, and you forged my signature to drain that account. And for what? So Chloe could get a massive chest augmentation and designer clothes just to trap a guy like Trevor at a midtown networking mixer. You stole my future so your golden child could play pretend in high society. Chloe deserves a beautiful life, Beatrice defended, her voice shaking with defensive rage. She knows how to secure a man who can actually go places. You chose to be a single mother. You chose to marry a man who left you with nothing but a special needs child and a house full of junk. You are bitter, Maya. You are just bitter because Chloe has the perfect husband and the perfect baby on the way. I stared at her, feeling the last remaining thread of daughterly affection snap and wither into ash. She truly believed her own narrative. She believed my late husband, a brilliant archivist who loved me fiercely, was a failure. She believed Malik was a burden. She believed the stolen corporate deed in my purse was her golden ticket to high society. This Sunday, Beatrice announced, lifting her chin proudly and smoothing the front of her blouse. I am hosting Chloe's baby shower right here, in the garden of her new home. Half the congregation is coming. The pastor is coming. I want you and your boy out of sight. You can stay in the basement until Monday, but you are not to come upstairs and ruin the aesthetic of the party with your miserable attitude. Trevor has already arranged for high-end catering. It is going to be the social event of the season, and you will not embarrass us. I looked at Trevor, who was smirking again, clearly pleased that my mother had rushed to his defense and shut me down. He crossed his arms, looking at me like I was a peasant who had just been dismissed by the queen. A baby shower, I said, my voice dropping back to that terrifying absolute calm. A massive party to celebrate the new house. That sounds wonderful, Mom. Beatrice blinked, clearly caught off guard by my sudden shift in tone. She expected me to scream, to cry, to beg for my house back. She expected a stereotypical dramatic breakdown that she could use to further paint me as the unstable, jealous older sister. Instead, I just smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that made Trevor shift uncomfortably on his feet. I will make sure not to ruin your aesthetic, I promised, stepping backward toward my car door. I will stay completely out of your way. Enjoy the catering, Trevor. Enjoy the party, Mom. I am sure it is going to be an absolutely unforgettable event for everyone involved. I opened my car door and slid back into the driver's seat. I rolled the window up, cutting off whatever self-righteous response Beatrice was preparing to deliver. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the driveway without looking back at them in the rearview mirror. I did not need to look at them. Their fates were already sealed. As I drove down the oak-lined streets of my neighborhood, I reached over and tapped the hidden folder on my phone screen again. The green dot representing the stolen 18th century violin was still pulsing steadily from the underground warehouse district. Trevor thought he had sold a box of junk to a flea market vendor. In reality, he had engaged in an interstate black market transaction involving stolen federal artifacts. and my mother had just handed me written, notarized proof of her committing real estate fraud. They wanted a high society party to show off their wealth and status. I was going to give them a spectacle they would never ever forget. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and dialed a highly secure number I knew by heart. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered on the other end. Art Crime Team Agent Miller speaking. Agent Miller, I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. This is Maya. I am the Director of Estate Liquidation at Aegis Heritage. I need to report a massive theft of a federally insured historical artifact. The value is over $250,000, and I have the exact GPS coordinates of the shadow broker holding the item. Furthermore, I have the identity of the seller who trafficked it. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the rapid clacking of a computer keyboard. I am listening, Maya. Give me the details. I drove toward my downtown office, laying out the trap piece by piece. The dominoes were lined up perfectly. All I had to do now was wait for Sunday and watch them fall. Is this about appearances again, Mom? I asked, my voice slicing through the heavy Atlanta humidity like a physical blade. Because if we are talking about what you are willing to sacrifice for a cheap facade, let us talk about the $50,000. My mother stiffened, her manicured hands dropping to her sides. She glanced nervously toward the street, terrified that one of the affluent neighbors might be stepping out to get their morning mail. Lower your voice, Maya. I do not know what you are talking about. I took a step closer, forcing her to look me in the eye. I am talking about my college savings, the money I earned working double shifts at the diner and cleaning office buildings until 2 in the morning, while you and Chloe slept comfortably at home. You forged my signature. You marched right into that bank and drained my entire account. And for what? So Chloe could get a massive chest augmentation and a brand new designer wardrobe just to hang around midtown hotel bars trying to catch a white finance bro. From the porch! Chloe gasped, clutching the railing. Trevor shifted his weight, looking mildly irritated rather than shocked, proving he likely knew exactly how his wife had funded her transformation. Beatrice thrust her chest out, her face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. She pointed a finger directly at my face. It was an investment in your sister's future. An investment that paid off beautifully. Look at where she is now. Look at the man she brought into this family. Trevor comes from good, respectable white people. He understands how real wealth works. He is elevating our entire family's status. Do you have any idea how it looks to Pastor Williams and the rest of the congregation at First Baptist to see Chloe married to a Wall Street executive? We are a model family now. A model family built on stolen money and lies, I fired back. He is not a Wall Street executive. He is an unemployed gambler draining your precious golden child dry. And you are so desperate for validation, so desperate to show off for a church congregation that does not actually care about you, that you are willing to throw your own grandson onto the street. How dare you speak to me like that? Beatrice shrieked, entirely abandoning her attempt to keep her voice down. You have always been jealous of your sister. Always. Ever since you were little girls, you resented her because she was softer, prettier, and knew how to attract the right kind of attention. You chose to be difficult. You chose to marry a man who left you with nothing but a special needs child and a house full of useless junk. I did not flinch. Every cruel word she spat was a weapon she had used against me for decades, but today, they bounced off me like paper darts. My husband was a brilliant archivist who loved me fiercely, something Beatrice could never comprehend. You are just bitter, Maya, my mother continued, her voice dripping with venomous superiority. You spend your days digging through dead people's trash. You are a glorified garbage collector. Trevor actually works with global markets. He deals with real assets. You should be down on your knees thanking him for bringing some actual class into this household. I use that power of attorney because you clearly lack the mental capacity to manage an asset as valuable as this house. Trevor knows how to leverage real estate. You would just fill it with more thrift store garbage. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was breathtaking. She stood in the driveway of a home I had purchased with my own blood and sweat, defending a man who had not paid a single bill in 8 months and belittling the exact profession that was currently funding her luxurious lifestyle. She thought I was a junk collector. She had absolutely no idea that my estate liquidation firm managed assets for the wealthiest political and corporate families in the entire state of Georgia. She had no idea the power I actually yielded. "This is our time to shine," Beatrice declared, smoothing the front of her expensive silk blouse, a blouse I had bought for her last Christmas. "I will not let your miserable negative energy drag this family down anymore. In fact, I am making it official right now. This Sunday, I am hosting Chloe's baby shower right here in this house, in the garden of her new home." She smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Half the congregation is coming," Beatrice boasted. "Pastor Williams and his wife are coming. Sister Jackson and the entire choir board are coming. They are all dying to see the beautiful home Trevor just secured for my daughter. I want you and your boy out of sight. You can stay down in the basement until Monday, but you are not to come upstairs and ruin the aesthetic of the party with your pathetic attitude. Trevor has already arranged for high-end catering. It is going to be the social event of the season, and you will not embarrass us." I looked at Trevor, who was smirking again on the porch, clearly pleased that my mother had rushed to his defense and shut me down so ruthlessly. I looked at Chloe, who was already typing on her phone, likely sending out last-minute digital invitations to brag about her stolen house. Finally, I looked back at my mother. I did not scream. I did not cry. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that made my mother pause, a brief flicker of uncertainty crossing her features before she masked it with her usual arrogance. "A baby shower," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm. "A massive party to celebrate the new house. That sounds wonderful, Mom." Beatrice blinked, clearly caught off guard by my sudden shift in tone. She expected me to break down to beg for my house back, to give her the dramatic reaction she desperately craved to prove I was the unstable one. "I will make sure not to ruin your aesthetic," I promised, taking a slow step backward toward my car door. "I will stay completely out of your way. Enjoy the catering, Trevor. Enjoy the party, Mom. I am sure it is going to be an absolutely unforgettable event for everyone involved." I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I rolled the window up, completely cutting off whatever self-righteous response Beatrice was preparing to deliver next. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the driveway without looking back at them in the rearview mirror. "Go ahead and host it, Mom," I whispered to myself in the quiet, air-conditioned sanctuary of my car. "It is going to be a very crowded party." The elevator doors slid open on the 45th floor of the shimmering glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. The polished marble floor reflected the gold lettering on the frosted glass wall before me. Aegis Heritage. I strode past the biometric security scanners, the heavy glass doors parting silently to admit me. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Nia, immediately fell into step beside me, handing me a freshly brewed espresso and a tablet glowing with the morning briefings. I bypassed the usual pleasantries. I instructed Nia to cancel my appointments with the governor's estate team and the Historical Society board. I needed my lead forensic accountant Xavier in my office immediately. My office was a sprawling corner suite with panoramic views of the entire city skyline. It was a space designed to intimidate and negotiate with the most ruthless billionaires in the South. This was not the domain of a thrift store scavenger. This was the command center of a woman who controlled millions of dollars in liquidated assets, corporate trusts, and federally protected artifacts. My family thought I collected garbage. They had absolutely no idea that I held the power to freeze accounts, seize properties, and dismantle empires before lunch. Xavier walked in a few moments later, his tablet already in hand. I gave him Trevor's full legal name, date of birth, and social security number, which I had pulled from a routine background check the very day my mother forced him into my house. I told Xavier to tear Trevor's digital life apart and leave no stone unturned. I wanted to see every bank account, every credit line, and every shadow transaction this supposedly elite finance broker had touched. While Xavier worked his magic, I sat at my multi-monitor desk and made a phone call on my encrypted line. I reached out to Silas, an exclusive antiquities dealer in New York, who had his ear pressed firmly to the black market. I described the 18th century Italian violin, providing the exact serial number, the maker's mark, and the unique grain pattern on the backboard. Silas did not need long to make his inquiries. Within 10 minutes, his return call confirmed what my GPS tracker had already suggested. A shadow broker operating out of an industrial warehouse in Atlanta had acquired the instrument late last night. Silas chuckled over the phone, telling me the broker had been boasting all morning about securing a masterpiece from a desperate, sweaty amateur who clearly had no idea what he was holding. The broker had paid $50,000 in unmarked cash. Not 3,000. 50,000. And Trevor had handed it over like a naive, eager fool, practically sprinting out of the warehouse with the money. I thanked Silas and hung up just as Xavier projected Trevor's financial footprint onto the massive smartboard mounted on my office wall. The illusion of the successful, wealthy white Wall Street savior instantly evaporated in a cascading waterfall of red numbers, defaulted accounts, and final notices. Trevor had not voluntarily transitioned from his brokerage firm to pursue better opportunities. He had been unceremoniously fired 8 months ago for gross incompetence and unauthorized trading on company time. But that humiliating dismissal was just the surface of his deception. Xavier dug deeper, tracing IP addresses to hidden cryptocurrency wallets. Trevor was a severe gambling addict. He had been leveraging non-existent assets to play the highly volatile crypto markets, and he had lost spectacularly. I was currently in the hole for $150,000. He did not owe this money to a standard bank or a credit card company. He owed it to an offshore syndicate, the exact kind of people who did not send polite collection letters in the mail. They sent enforcers. Xavier pulled up intercepted text messages from Trevor's encrypted messaging app. The messages were frantic, pathetic pleas from Trevor begging for more time, promising that a massive real estate payout was coming any day now. The syndicate had given him a hard, unforgiving deadline of Sunday evening. If he did not produce the cash by then, they promised to visit him in person. That was why Trevor and my mother were so desperate to steal my house. The pieces of their pathetic puzzle clicked together perfectly. Trevor intended to leverage the fraudulent deed my mother provided to secure a rapid, hard money loan from a predatory lender. He needed the equity of my home to save his own kneecaps from being shattered by debt collectors. He was willing to render his pregnant wife, his mother-in-law, my autistic son, and me entirely homeless just to cover his gambling addiction. And Chloe's expensive, boastful lifestyle was entirely funded by a house of cards. Xavier brought up her credit reports on the screen. Trevor had secretly maxed out 4 different high-limit credit cards in Chloe's name to keep up the appearance of wealth to her and my mother. The designer maternity dresses, the luxury dinners, the expensive bourbon he was drinking at my expense. It was all funded by crippling debt that would eventually bankrupt my sister. I stared at the financial ruin on the screen, unable to summon even a single ounce of pity for her. She had chosen to worship a mirage, and now she was going to drown in it. I watched the red numbers scroll across the smartboard. Trevor had sold my late husband's legacy, my autistic son's safe haven, for $50,000 in cash, just to keep the syndicate off his back for a few more days. He truly thought he was a mastermind playing a brilliant game of chess. He was actually just a cornered, panicking rat running blindly into a trap. My laptop chimed sharply with a high-priority alert. I opened the notification immediately. It was an automated email from the proprietary tracking software linked to the GPS microchip hidden inside the violin case. The green dot on the digital map had been moving steadily for the past hour. Now the software confirmed it had crossed the border from Georgia into South Carolina, heading directly for a private shipping port in Charleston. The shadow broker was actively moving the artifact to ship it to a wealthy overseas buyer. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, crossing my arms as I stared at the flashing red alert on my screen. Taking a stolen item of that magnitude was a severe crime. Moving it across state lines elevated it to a federal trafficking offense. The exact moment that violin crossed the Georgia border, Trevor's local theft transformed into a massive federal crime under the National Stolen Property Act. I picked up my phone and opened the direct line to the FBI art crime team agent I had spoken to earlier from my car. I forwarded the real-time tracking data, the transaction confirmation from Silas, and the undeniable documented proof of Trevor's identity as the seller. The federal agents now had absolutely everything they needed to seize the asset at the port and issue an immediate high-level arrest warrant for Trevor. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that perfectly mirrored the polished glass and steel of my empire. The trap was set, the evidence was airtight, and the federal authorities were fully mobilized. Interstate transport of stolen federal goods. The game begins. The phone line clicked, connecting me directly to Special Agent Vance of the FBI Art Crime Team. We had worked together previously when my firm assisted the Bureau in recovering stolen indigenous artifacts, so I bypassed the usual bureaucratic channels. Maya Vance's voice was crisp and alert over the encrypted line. I am reviewing the data packet you just transferred. Tell me what I'm looking at. You are looking at a slam-dunk federal indictment, Vance, I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the cool glass of my desk. The target is Trevor. I have attached his full background profile, social security number, and the digital footprint of his offshore cryptocurrency debts. He just trafficked a federally insured 18th century Italian violin. The serial number is in the file. The instrument crossed into South Carolina exactly 12 minutes ago. It is currently sitting at the Charleston port waiting to be loaded onto a private freighter. I heard the rapid clicking of Vance's keyboard. I see the GPS ping. We have field agents 20 minutes from that port. I am dispatching a recovery team right now. We will seize the instrument before it gets near a shipping container. But what about the seller? If we snatch the violin, the shadow broker will ghost, and Trevor will scatter. Trevor is not going anywhere, I assured him, swiveling my chair to look out over the Atlanta skyline. He is too arrogant and too broke to run. He thinks he just pulled off the perfect victimless crime. Furthermore, he is currently squatting in a property owned by my corporate trust, operating under the delusion that his mother-in-law legally transferred the deed to him. Vance let out a low whistle. Real estate fraud on top of interstate trafficking of cultural property. This guy is speedrunning a 20-year sentence. I will draft the arrest warrant for Trevor immediately. Do you have a location where we can pick him up quietly? I paused, letting a cold, deliberate silence stretch over the phone line. Quietly was the absolute last thing I wanted. Trevor had publicly humiliated me. My mother had stripped my autistic child's sanctuary bare and bragged about it to her church congregation. They wanted a public spectacle to flaunt their stolen wealth. I was going to give them exactly that. No, I said, my voice steady and precise. I do not want this done quietly. I have a specific time and a location for the arrest. I am listening, Vance said, his tone shifting to professional curiosity. This Sunday at 2 in the afternoon, I instructed. Trevor and my sister are hosting a massive baby shower at the property they attempted to steal from me. Half the congregation of First Baptist will be there. The pastor, the choir board, everyone my mother desperately tries to impress. I want your team to roll up to that exact address right in the middle of the catered lunch. I want the tactical vehicles, the windbreakers, the whole federal package. You will find Trevor holding court in the backyard. Vance chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. You are not just liquidating assets anymore, Maya. You are liquidating reputations. They stole from my special needs son, I replied, the icy calm never leaving my voice. They dismantled his safe space to buy a smart crib and fund a gambling addiction. I want them to feel the exact same level of violation and exposure they forced on my child. Sunday at 2, can you guarantee it? The warrant will be signed by a federal judge by noon today, Vance confirmed. We will have the local field office coordinate the raid for Sunday afternoon. Consider the target locked. Thank you, Vance, I said, ending the call. I tapped another button on my desk console, summoning my personal corporate attorney, Marcus. He walked into my office a few minutes later, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, carrying a sleek leather portfolio. Marcus was a shark in the courtroom, specializing in high-wealth estate law and corporate asset protection. You asked to see me, Maya, Marcus said, taking a seat across from my desk. I slid the crumpled forged deed transfer across the desk toward him. Take a look at this masterpiece. My mother brought it to my attention this morning. She used the generic medical power of attorney I signed last year to miraculously transfer the deed of my 4-bedroom house into Trevor and Chloe's names. Marcus picked up the paper, adjusting his glasses. He read over the document for exactly 5 seconds before he started laughing. It was a genuine, booming laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my office. Tell me this is a joke. She actually tried to use a basic healthcare proxy to transfer real estate. She downloaded a template online, had someone forge a notary stamp, and genuinely believes she just outsmarted me. I explained, leaning back in my chair. She told me I have 1 week to vacate the premises before Trevor officially throws me out. Marcus shook his head, tossing the worthless piece of paper back onto my desk. This is legally absurd. First of all, the power of attorney she used only covers medical decisions in the event you are incapacitated. Second, and far more importantly, you do not even own that house as an individual. You transferred that property into a blind corporate trust 3 years ago for tax purposes. Exactly, I said, tapping my pen against the desk. The house belongs to Oasis Holdings, a subsidiary of Aegis Heritage. By forging my signature to transfer a corporate-owned asset, my mother did not just commit petty theft, she committed felony real estate fraud. And since she emailed a scanned copy of this garbage to the county clerk's office this morning trying to expedite it, she just triggered a wire fraud charge. Marcus pulled a sleek silver pen from his pocket, his eyes gleaming with legal anticipation. Do you want me to draft a cease and desist letter? We can have her served by the end of the day, invalidate the transfer, and legally evict Trevor and Chloe by tomorrow morning. I looked out at the sprawling city below, watching the tiny cars move like ants along the highway. A cease and desist would warn them. It would give them a chance to scramble to play the victim, to cry to the church about a misunderstanding. I did not want them warned. I wanted them decimated. No, I answered, turning back to Marcus. Do not send a letter. Do not file a single motion to block it. Let her believe the transfer was completely successful. Let her bask in the glory of being the ultimate matriarch who secured a mansion for her favorite daughter and her white knight son-in-law. Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by my strategy. You are just going to let them think they own your house. I am going to let them host an extravagant baby shower on Sunday, I corrected him. I am going to let my mother parade Trevor around in front of the entire congregation, boasting about his massive wealth and his real estate prowess. Let her soak up every ounce of that stolen validation, because when the FBI raids that party to arrest Trevor for trafficking stolen federal property, I want the local police right behind them to arrest my mother for real estate fraud. Marcus smiled, a slow, predatory expression. You are building a flawless trap. The corporate trust documentation is airtight. When the authorities pull the property records, they will see her forged signature, attempting to steal a multi-million-dollar corporate asset. She is looking at 5 to 10 years in a federal facility. She made her choice when she threw my autistic son out of his bedroom. I said, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees. She prioritized a racist, classist delusion over her own blood. She is about to learn exactly how the real world operates. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meticulous preparation. While I worked out of my downtown office, solidifying the logistics with the FBI and my legal team, the situation at my house devolved into absolute absurdity. I spent my evenings down in the windowless basement with Malik. I had set up a comfortable air mattress and brought down his noise-canceling headphones, a few of his favorite sketch pads, and his weighted blanket. It was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew, but Malik actually seemed to prefer the quiet isolation of the basement compared to the loud, chaotic hostility upstairs. Above our heads, the house was a circus of unearned arrogance. Beatrice and Chloe had hired a wildly expensive event planning team to transform the backyard into a high-society garden party. I could hear the heavy footsteps of workers hauling in floral archways, catered buffet tables, and a massive custom-built throne chair for Chloe to sit in while she opened her gifts. Trevor strutted around the hardwood floors in designer loafers he had undoubtedly purchased with the cash he got from selling my husband's violin. I could hear him on the phone constantly boasting to his equally broke finance buddies about the new property he had just acquired. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. On Saturday night, the eve of the baby shower, I walked upstairs to grab a bottle of water from the kitchen. The house was unrecognizable. Massive bouquets of white roses and blue hydrangeas covered every surface. The dining room table was buried under stacks of expensive crystal glassware and silver serving trays. Beatrice was standing in the kitchen aggressively polishing a silver platter. She looked up when I walked in, her face immediately contorting into a scowl of deep disapproval. I thought I told you to stay out of sight, she snapped, pointing the polishing cloth at me like a weapon. The caterers are arriving at 6 in the morning to start prepping the appetizers. I do not want you wandering around looking like a homeless person while decent people are trying to work. I calmly opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water. Just getting a drink, Mom. Do not worry, I will be out of your hair. Chloe waddled into the kitchen, rubbing her pregnant belly dramatically. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. You better stay in that basement tomorrow, Maya. Pastor Williams is bringing his wife, and the mayor's chief of staff might even drop by. Trevor invited some of his old fraternity brothers, too. We cannot have you ruining the aesthetic with your depressed single mother energy. Just keep the kid quiet. I unscrewed the cap of my water bottle and took a slow sip. I looked at the extravagant floral arrangements, the expensive catering equipment, the sheer scale of the illusion they had built on the back of my stolen property. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, completely blind to the drop. Do not worry about me, Chloe, I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. I have my own plans for tomorrow. I guarantee you will not even notice I am here. Beatrice scoffed, turning back to her polishing. Good, because tomorrow is about celebrating success, family, and class. Things you clearly know nothing about. I did not argue. I simply turned around and walked back toward the basement door. As I descended the wooden stairs into the cool darkness, I heard them laughing above me, already celebrating their grand victory. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked over at Malik. He was sitting cross-legged on the air mattress, carefully drawing a highly detailed geometric pattern in his sketchbook. He looked up at me, his dark eyes wide and trusting. I walked over and knelt beside him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a brand new tailored suit I had specifically purchased for him earlier that day. It was a deep navy blue, perfectly fitted with a crisp white shirt and a silk bow tie. What is this? Malik asked, his fingers gently tracing the smooth fabric. It is for tomorrow, baby, I whispered, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. We are going to a party. Malik tilted his head, confusion wrinkling his brow. But Grandma said we have to stay in the dark. I smiled, a fierce protective warmth blooming in my chest. Grandma does not make the rules anymore. Tomorrow we are taking our house back, and we are going to look spectacular doing it. I ended the call with the FBI and stepped out of my office, the adrenaline humming quietly beneath my skin. The pristine glass-walled corridors of Aegis Heritage stretched out before me. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp geometric shadows across the polished marble floor. I matched my breathing to the steady click of my heels, maintaining the absolute composure of a woman who held her entire life strictly under her own control. My lead corporate attorney, Julian, fell into step beside me. Julian was a ruthless litigator, a man who navigated multi-million-dollar asset disputes with lethal precision. I did not bother with pleasantries. I reached into my tailored blazer and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper my mother had so aggressively shoved into my chest just hours ago. I handed it to Julian without breaking my stride. Take a look at the future of my mother, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. She proudly presented this to me this morning. She believes she has legally evicted me from my own home. Julian adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the document as we walked. He paused for a fraction of a second, a genuine scoff escaping his lips. He looked up at me, checking to see if this was some sort of elaborate prank. Maya, tell me this is a joke, Julian said, tapping the paper against his palm. Your mother actually attempted to use a basic medical power of attorney to transfer a piece of premium Atlanta real estate. She downloaded a generic template off the internet, I replied, staring straight ahead as we rounded the corner toward the executive boardroom. She had someone forge a notary stamp. Trevor probably bought it for her on the dark web using his dwindling credit. They genuinely believe that a piece of paper meant to authorize medical decisions in an emergency gives them absolute dominion over a multi-million-dollar property. They think they just outsmarted me. Julian shook his head in absolute disbelief. The arrogance is staggering, but the legal ignorance is even worse. A healthcare proxy does not grant financial authority. Any first-year law student could tell you this deed transfer is completely void. But that is not even the best part. I stopped walking and turned to face him, the harsh sunlight illuminating the cold satisfaction in my eyes. The best part is that I do not own that house. Exactly, Julian agreed, a sharp predatory smile matching my own. You have not owned that property in your personal name for 3 years. When your husband passed away, we restructured all your assets to protect you and Malik. We transferred the deed of that house directly into a blind corporate trust. The property legally belongs to Oasis Holdings, a subsidiary of this very corporation. My mother did not just steal from her daughter, I stated, spelling out the magnificent trap she had walked right into. She attempted to steal a high-value asset from a registered corporate entity. She forged the signature of a corporate trust officer. Julian raised his hand, counting off the felonies on his fingers. Forgery of a legal document, fraudulent transfer of property, identity theft. And because she could not wait to finalize her theft, I saw she filed this electronically through the county clerk portal this morning. That means she used internet servers across state lines to submit forged documents. That automatically triggers a federal wire fraud charge. I leaned against the cool glass of the corridor wall. My mother has spent my entire adult life trying to diminish me. She despises the fact that I am a self-made black woman who built an empire from the ground up without relying on anyone. She views my independence as a direct threat to her worldview. In her eyes, my success does not count because I do not parade it around the church on Sunday mornings. I do not wear flashy logos or lease luxury cars I cannot afford. I wear simple clothes. I provide for my autistic son and I mind my own business. To Beatrice, that makes me a failure. Julian listened quietly, knowing the history of my family dynamics. He had seen the way they treated me at my husband's funeral, pushing me aside while making the tragedy entirely about themselves. And then there is Trevor. I continued, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. Trevor is the exact opposite of everything I am. He is a loud, arrogant white finance bro who has never actually earned a single thing in his life. But to my mother, his whiteness and his fake Wall Street pedigree make him royalty. She is so utterly desperate for the validation of the white upper class that she is willing to sacrifice her own flesh and blood to keep him happy. She thinks that by gifting him my house, she is securing Chloe's future and elevating our family status. She wants to be the ultimate matriarch who saved the day. Julian looked down at the forged deed again. She is going to be the ultimate matriarch of a federal holding cell. The penalties for wire fraud alone carry up to 20 years. When you add the corporate property theft, she is looking at a catastrophic sentence. She handed you the murder weapon with her own fingerprints all over it. She was so proud of it, I whispered, remembering the triumphant sneer on her face in the driveway. She told me I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own home. She told me I should be grateful Trevor was taking over the assets. She stood on my driveway and defended a man who sold her own grandson's prized possessions to pay off a gambling debt. She looked me in the eye and chose him. That is why we end this right now, Julian said, pulling a sleek tablet from his briefcase. I can have my paralegals draft a cease and desist order within the hour. We will have a process server hand deliver it to your mother and Trevor by lunchtime. We will invalidate the fraudulent transfer, lock them out of the county system, and serve them with an immediate eviction notice. They will be out on the street before sunset. I looked at Julian. The standard legal procedure made perfect sense. It was clean, efficient, and immediately effective. It would stop them in their tracks and protect my property. But it would also give them a chance to scramble. A cease and desist would alert them to the danger. It would give Beatrice time to play the victim, to run to Pastor Williams and cry about how her ruthless, ungrateful daughter was throwing her pregnant sister out into the cold. It would give Trevor time to pack his bags and vanish before the authorities realized he was trafficking stolen federal artifacts. I did not want them to have a warning. I did not want a quiet, polite legal resolution. I wanted absolute, undeniable devastation. No, I said, my voice resolute and unyielding. Do not send the letter. Julian paused, his finger hovering over his tablet screen. Maya, if we do not block this transfer, the county clerk might mistakenly process the preliminary paperwork. It will create a bureaucratic headache to untangle later. I do not care about the paperwork, I replied. Let the clerk process it. Let the county send the confirmation email to my mother's inbox. Let her print it out and frame it on the wall if she wants to. Julian frowned, trying to understand my strategy. You want to let them think they got away with it. I want them to feel invincible, I explained, stepping away from the wall and looking straight into Julian's eyes. This Sunday, my mother is hosting a massive baby shower at my house. She invited the pastor, the choir board, and every influential member of her social circle. She plans to use this party to officially announce that Trevor bought the house for Chloe. She wants to stand in the center of that garden and soak up the admiration of hundreds of people. She wants to wear the crown. Julian slowly lowered his tablet, a look of profound realization crossing his face. The art crime team raid. Exactly, I confirmed. The FBI is hitting the house at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon to arrest Trevor for interstate trafficking of a stolen federal artifact. If we send a cease and desist today, they will panic. Trevor will run, and my mother will hide behind her church friends. But if we do nothing, they will all be gathered in one place celebrating their stolen wealth right in front of the entire community. I took the forged deed from Julian's hand and folded it neatly in half. When the federal agents arrest Trevor, I want the local authorities walking right in behind them with a warrant for my mother's arrest. Let her host the party of the decade. Let my mother enjoy the absolute thrill of feeling like she is the master of the universe. Let her enjoy the illusion of being the owner of that house, until the exact second she feels the cold steel of handcuffs locking around her wrists. Julian nodded slowly, a deep respect shining in his eyes. You are not just taking your house back. You are dismantling her entire reality in front of the only audience she cares about. She built her life on a facade, I said, turning to walk back toward my office. It is only fitting that her finale is a public spectacle. Keep the corporate trust documents ready for the prosecutors on Monday morning, Julian. Enjoy your weekend. I have a baby shower to prepare for. Sunday morning broke over Atlanta with a suffocating heavy heat. But inside the walls of my home, the atmosphere was entirely manufactured. The air conditioning was cranked to a frigid temperature to preserve the thousands of dollars worth of imported white hydrangeas and cascading orchids that Chloe had ordered. I could hear the chaos unfolding right above my head, the heavy, rhythmic thud of caterers hauling massive silver chafing dishes and tiered dessert stands across my custom hardwood floors echoed down into the basement. Upstairs, my mother was in her absolute element. Beatrice was orchestrating the baby shower like a general commanding a battlefield, her voice carrying through the floorboards with piercing clarity. She was on her cell phone, likely pacing back and forth in my living room, bragging to one of the prominent gossips from the First Baptist Choir Board. Yes, sister, Thomas. Beatrice boasted, her tone dripping with that manufactured syrupy sweetness she reserved exclusively for church folks. Trevor finalized the paperwork on Thursday. He just surprised Chloe with the deed. I keep telling everyone that man is a true provider. He works so hard on Wall Street he practically commands the markets. Oh, you will see the property today. It is a stunning 4-bedroom. We are just so blessed that Chloe found a white man who understands legacy and generational wealth. I sat on the edge of the air mattress in the dim basement listening to her spin a web of absolute fiction. She was claiming my 10 years of grueling corporate ascension, my late husband's life insurance, and my meticulous financial planning as a spontaneous gift from a man who is currently dodging calls from violent offshore loan sharks. She was literally standing inside a home bought by a black woman's sweat and intellect, crediting a mediocre, unemployed white man for all of it just to secure her own social standing in the church pews. Careful with those linens, Chloe's voice chimed in, sharp and nasal, yelling at a member of the catering staff. Those are imported silk. Do not let them touch the baseboards. Trevor, babe, can you tell them to move the mimosa bar closer to the French doors? I want the lighting to be perfect when the mayor's chief of staff gets here. Trevor chuckled, the heavy, self-satisfied sound of a man who believed he was an untouchable king. I could picture him standing in my kitchen, wearing the bespoke Italian linen suit I knew he had purchased on Friday, using the cash from my husband's stolen violin. Relax, babe, Trevor said smoothly, his voice carrying down the ventilation grate. I will handle the staff. You just focus on looking beautiful for the photos. I want Pastor Williams to see exactly what a successful high-net-worth household looks like. We need to make a solid impression if we are going to leverage this property for that upcoming charity board seat I want. You are so good to me, Chloe cooed, the sound of her kissing his cheek completely audible. I just wish Maya had cleared out her junk completely. It is so embarrassing knowing she is lurking down there in the dark like some sort of troll. What if one of the VIP guests needs to use the basement bathroom? Let her rot down there, Trevor replied dismissively, his footsteps tapping right above my head. I already locked the deadbolt at the top of the basement stairs from this side. She cannot come up and ruin the aesthetic even if she tries. I told her if she makes a single sound while my guests are here, I will throw her and that defective kid of hers out onto the curb before sunset. She knows her place. I looked at the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs. He had actually locked us in. He had illegally imprisoned a woman and a child in a basement to protect his social climbing garden party. Every single action they took only added another federal charge to their impending ruin. Unlawful restraint. False imprisonment. The list was growing so spectacularly long that Julian was going to have an absolute field day in civil court once the federal criminal trials concluded. I turned my attention back to Malik. He was sitting on the cold concrete floor, perfectly content in the dim light, carefully lining up his remaining wooden blocks in a complex color-coded sequence. He had his noise-canceling headphones firmly secured over his ears, completely insulated from the toxic circus performing above us. He did not know that his uncle had locked us in. He did not know that his grandmother considered him an embarrassment. All he knew was that I was right beside him, keeping him safe. "Hey, Beatrice," Trevor called out, his voice booming across the main floor again. "Did you make sure Maya's beat-up sedan is parked down the street? I do not want that rusted piece of trash blocking the driveway when the luxury valet service arrives." "I handled it," my mother shouted back. "I made her move it last night. I also told her that if she or the boy makes a peep today, I will personally pack their bags myself." Today is about showing this community that our family has finally reached the upper echelon. I will not have my ungrateful, bitter daughter dragging us down with her poverty mindset. I listened to the symphony of their arrogance, feeling a deep, vibrating sense of anticipation running through my veins. They were so busy congratulating themselves, so busy looking down their noses at me, that they were completely blind to the reality of their situation. They thought poverty was a mindset. They thought wealth was defined by catered mimosa bars and flashy suits. They had absolutely no idea that true wealth, the kind of wealth I wielded every single day, did not need to shout. It did not need floral archways or stolen champagne to prove it existed. True wealth moved in absolute silence, and it struck with devastating, lethal precision. The antique grandfather clock in the upstairs hallway chimed 1 o'clock. The guests would be arriving in exactly 1 hour. The caterers had finished setting up their stations, and the steady, elegant hum of live jazz music began to pipe through my home's integrated sound system. The stage was perfectly set. I stood up and walked over to a high-end opaque garment bag I had quietly carried down the night before. I unzipped it, revealing the contents. I had not packed thrift store clothes for my temporary exile in the basement. I reached inside and pulled out a breathtaking tailored suit I had commissioned from an exclusive private tailor in Buckhead. It was a rich, deep emerald green silk blend that caught the limited light of the basement and seemed to glow with quiet power. I stripped off my plain beige sweater and dark jeans, the uniform of the defeated sister they expected me to wear. I slipped into the emerald suit, adjusting the sharp lapels that framed my collarbones perfectly. I clasped a simple but staggeringly expensive diamond tennis necklace around my throat, a gift from my late husband that I had kept locked away in a secure bank vault for years. I applied my makeup with meticulous, unhurried care, outlining my lips in a bold, unapologetic shade of crimson. I swept my hair up into a flawless structural crown that commanded respect. The woman staring back at me in the small, cracked basement mirror was not an exhausted, abused widow. She was a corporate titan preparing to execute a hostile takeover of her own life. I walked over to the second garment bag hanging from an exposed water pipe. I unzipped it and pulled out a miniature, perfectly tailored three-piece suit in a matching shade of midnight blue. I knelt beside Malik, gently tapping his shoulder to get his attention before lifting one side of his headphones. "It is time to get dressed, my love," I said softly. Malik blinked, looking at the suit. He did not like restrictive clothing, but this specific suit had been constructed entirely with seamless, sensory-friendly fabrics just for him. I helped him slide his arms into the tailored jacket. I buttoned his crisp white shirt and adjusted the small silk bow tie at his collar. He looked incredibly handsome, a sharp, brilliant young boy who deserved the absolute best this world had to offer, not the dark basement his grandmother thought he belonged in. I brushed a speck of dust from his shoulders and took his small, warm hand in mine. He looked up at me, his dark eyes wide and trusting. "Are we going upstairs now?" Malik asked, his voice a quiet, hesitant whisper. The loud man said we have to stay in the dark. I smiled down at him, my heart swelling with fierce, unapologetic love and a burning desire for total retribution. I reached into the pocket of my emerald blazer and pulled out a small, heavy brass key. It was the master key to the house, the one that bypassed every single interior lock, including the deadbolt Trevor mistakenly thought could hold me captive. "The loud man is about to leave, baby," I said, my voice steady, resonant, and completely devoid of fear. "Let us go, son. It is time to get your things back." The afternoon heat of Atlanta was completely masked by the sheer volume of chilled champagne and industrial misting fans strategically placed around my sprawling backyard. The space had been utterly transformed into a grotesque monument to my mother's ego. A massive white tent dominated the lawn, draped in hundreds of imported orchids and pale blue hydrangeas that I knew cost more than Chloe's entire credit limit. Waiters in crisp, black vests circulated with trays of seared scallops and caviar blinis weaving through the affluent crowd. Conversations hovered in the humid air, thick with fake humility and aggressive social climbing. Women from the First Baptist Choir Board, wearing their Sunday best and wide-brimmed hats, clustered around the custom mimosa, their eyes sweeping the property with undisguised envy. The entire congregation had turned out for what was billed as the social event of the season. My mother, Beatrice, stood at the absolute center of it all. She wore a tailored cream suit that screamed old money. Her hands adorned with jewelry, she had definitely put on one of the maxed-out credit cards Trevor had secretly opened in Chloe's name. She was holding court with Pastor Williams and his wife, basking in the spotlight she had craved her entire life. I could hear her voice carrying over the smooth jazz playing from the outdoor speakers, loud enough to ensure anyone within a 20-foot radius could hear her bragging. "We are just so incredibly blessed," Pastor Beatrice gushed, placing a theatrical hand over her heart. "When Trevor surprised my Chloe with the deed to this property, I simply wept. It is a stunning 4-bedroom estate fully paid off. He has such a brilliant mind for finance. To see a young white man embrace our family with such generosity, providing true generational wealth for my grandchild, it is a testament to the Lord's favor." Pastor Williams nodded gravely, swirling his sparkling cider. "It is a beautiful thing to see a man step up and lead his household, Sister Beatrice. The Lord rewards financial prudence and strong family values." Chloe glided over right on cue, her hand resting perfectly on her swollen belly. She wore a custom maternity gown of spun silk that swept the freshly cut grass. She looked like a wealthy socialite, a far cry from the woman who had begged me to pay her car insurance just 6 months ago. She leaned into Pastor Williams' wife, projecting her voice so the entire patio could hear the performance. "Trevor is so protective of us," Chloe simpered, batting her eyelashes. "He insisted on a custom smart crib and top-tier security for the nursery. He says his heir deserves nothing but absolute perfection. He has been working so hard on global markets just to make sure I do not have to lift a single finger." A few yards away, standing near the outdoor kitchen, I had paid $20,000 to install last summer. Trevor was holding a crystal tumbler of my stolen Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. He was surrounded by a few of the older church deacons and some of his own fraternity brothers' guys, who looked completely out of place at a black church baby shower, but were clearly there for the free top-shelf liquor. Trevor was adjusting a Rolex, a cheap fake I had spotted the day he bought it, and speaking with the loud, unearned confidence of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. "The key to liquidating assets in a volatile market is aggressive shorting," Trevor announced to the deacons, swirling his bourbon with a practiced arrogance. "I told my partners up in New York you have to leverage prime real estate to diversify your crypto portfolio. That is how I secured this entire property for Chloe without breaking a sweat. It is all about dominant market maneuvers and knowing when to strike." The older men nodded, clearly impressed by the aggressive financial jargon pouring out of a man they assumed was a Wall Street titan. They were completely captivated by the illusion. I was standing on my deck drinking my liquor, lying to my community, while actively sweating under the pressure of a $150,000 debt to a violent criminal syndicate. The sheer blinding audacity was almost poetic. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, entirely convinced that they had successfully buried the actual owner of the house in the dark, windowless basement beneath their feet. They genuinely thought I was sitting in the dust, weeping over my stolen home and my child's stolen peace, too broken and intimidated to ever show my face again. Beatrice stepped up to the edge of the stone patio, tapping her champagne flute with a silver spoon to request the attention of the 70 guests scattered across my lawn. The hired sound engineer immediately lowered the smooth jazz music. Faces turned toward her, expectant, smiling, and completely oblivious to the federal trap closing in around them. Family and friends. Beatrice projected her voice, trembling with heavily manufactured emotion. Today we celebrate the upcoming arrival of my beautiful grandchild. But we also must celebrate the man who made this beautiful sanctuary possible. My wonderful son-in-law, Trevor. He has elevated this family, bringing us security status and this magnificent estate. She raised her glass high, turning her beaming, proud gaze toward Trevor, who puffed out his chest and raised his tumbler in response. To Trevor and Chloe, Beatrice declared, "The new owners of this beautiful home, may your wealth multiply and your blessings overflow." Glasses raised into the air across the entire yard. A chorus of polite, admiring applause began to ripple through the wealthy crowd. And then, the heavy custom-built sliding glass doors, leading from the main house to the patio, were violently shoved open. The heavy glass hit the stoppers with a brutal, resounding crack that sounded exactly like a gunshot. The sound engineer jumped, accidentally cutting the jazz music off completely. The applause died instantly in the throats of the guests. 70 pairs of eyes whipped away from Trevor and Beatrice, snapping directly toward the threshold of the house. I stepped over the threshold and into the blinding afternoon sun, making absolutely no effort to soften my entrance. I did not slink out of the shadows. I did not bow my head. I walked onto the stone patio with the measured, predatory grace of a woman who owned every single inch of the ground beneath her feet. The vibrant emerald silk of my custom-tailored suit flowed around me like liquid glass, catching the summer breeze and reflecting the light with a staggering brilliance. The diamond tennis necklace, resting against my collarbones, flashed violently in the sun, casting shattered rainbows across the stunned faces of the congregation. Beside me, holding my left hand with quiet confidence, was my son. Malik looked like a young prince in his seamless midnight blue suit and crisp white shirt. The sensory-friendly fabric allowed him to stand tall and comfortable, his noise-canceling headphones firmly in place, completely shielding him from the sudden, suffocating silence that had fallen over the yard. He was not the broken, abnormal burden my mother had described to her church friends. He was a brilliant, beautiful child standing right by his mother's side. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and palpable. Pastor William slowly lowered his glass of sparkling cider, his eyes wide behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Sister Thomas, the chief gossip of the choir board, actually dropped her silk fan onto the grass, her mouth hanging completely open. They had spent the entire afternoon listening to Beatrice spin a tragic tale about her destitute, bitter, unemployed older daughter, who was supposedly hiding in the basement out of pure shame. They expected a wretched creature to crawl out of the dark. Instead, they were staring at a corporate titan radiating absolute, uncompromising wealth and power. The contrast between the narrative they had been fed and the reality standing before them caused a physical ripple of confusion through the wealthy crowd. Guests instinctively stepped back, parting like the Red Sea, as I took a slow, deliberate step forward onto the manicured lawn. "What are you doing up here?" Chloe shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet. Her carefully constructed high society persona evaporated in an instant, replaced by the shrill, panicked tone of a spoiled child who realized her toy was about to be taken away. She gripped the fabric of her expensive maternity gown, her face flushing a blotchy, uneven red. "I told you to stay in the basement. You are ruining the aesthetic. You are ruining my baby shower." My mother Beatrice recovered from her initial shock and immediately shifted into aggressive damage control. She plastered a tight, terrifyingly fake smile onto her face and practically sprinted toward me. her eyes darting nervously toward Pastor Williams to gauge his reaction. "Maya, what is the meaning of this?" Beatrice hissed, keeping her voice low but laced with absolute venom. She reached out, attempting to grab my arm and physically pull me back toward the sliding glass doors. "Go back downstairs this instant. You are embarrassing this family. You are completely out of your mind if you think you can parade around here in some rented costume and disrupt your sister's special day." I did not even look at my mother. I simply shifted my weight and easily sidestepped her grasping hand, leaving her stumbling awkwardly forward. I kept my gaze fixed dead ahead, projecting an aura of untouchable authority that forced the guest to continue backing away. That was when Trevor decided to step in. He handed his tumbler of stolen bourbon to one of his fraternity brothers and marched across the patio, puffing his chest out to its maximum capacity. He was desperate to play the role of the dominant, protective white patriarch in front of a black audience he secretly viewed as his inferiors. He inserted himself directly into my path, towering over me and crossing his arms over his chest. His pale eyes were dark with fury, utterly offended that a black woman he viewed as a subservient charity case was daring to challenge his authority in public. "You heard your mother!" Maya Trevor barked, his voice loud enough to ensure every single guest in the backyard could hear his commanding tone. "Turn around and take the kid back down to the basement. You are not welcome at this party. We are hosting important people today, and I will not allow your toxic jealousy to ruin my wife's celebration." I stopped walking. I stood exactly 3 feet away from him, completely unbothered by his aggressive posture. I looked him up and down, taking in his tailored linen suit and his fake Rolex, silently calculating exactly how many minutes he had left as a free man. "I am just coming up to enjoy the fresh air, Trevor," I said, my voice carrying a smooth, resonant calm that echoed effortlessly across the silent yard. "It is a beautiful day. I simply wanted to see what kind of catering you managed to secure for my property." Trevor let out a loud, mocking laugh, throwing his head back and looking toward his friends for validation. A few of them chuckled nervously, but the church elders remained dead silent, sensing that the atmosphere had shifted into dangerous territory. "Your property," Trevor sneered, leaning down slightly to get in my face. "Are you actually delusional, or did the dampness in the basement finally rot your brain? You do not own a single brick of this estate anymore. Beatrice transferred the deed to Chloe and me on Thursday. I am the sole legal owner of this 4-bedroom house. I am the one paying for the catering. I am the one providing for this family. You are nothing but a squatter living on my charity." Chloe waddled up to stand beside him, clinging to his bicep and glaring at me with pure hatred. "You heard my husband. This is our home now. You need to leave before you embarrass yourself even more. Everyone here knows you are just bitter because you failed at life and I succeeded." I ignored Chloe completely. My eyes remained locked on Trevor. His arrogance was a towering inferno, completely blinding him to the reality of the situation. He genuinely believed his race, his gender, and his fabricated finance background made him invincible against me. "You need to turn around and walk back through those doors right now," Trevor warned, taking another step forward, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. "If you do not take that kid and get off my patio this exact second, I am calling the police. I will have you arrested for trespassing on my private property, and I will press full charges. I promise you, Maya, the cops are not going to take your side when I show them the deed with my name on it." The absolute silence in the backyard stretched tightly like a wire about to snap. 70 guests held their breath, waiting to see if the disgraced widowed sister would break down in tears and retreat into the shadows. Beatrice stood frozen behind me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest, silently praying to a God she only acknowledged on Sundays that I would back down and save her precious reputation. I did not retreat, I did not flinch. I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with a terrified waiter standing frozen by the mimosa bar, holding a silver tray of filled champagne flutes. I raised a single finger, silently summoning him. The young man swallowed hard, scurried across the stone patio, and presented the tray with trembling hands. I reached out, the diamonds on my wrist flashing brilliantly, and picked up a crystal flute of chilled champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the crisp taste of the expensive vintage my mother had undoubtedly bought on credit. I lowered the glass, letting a sharp, predatory smile spread across my face. I looked directly into Trevor's pale, furious eyes, watching the first tiny fraction of doubt finally begin to creep into his expression. "Call the police, Trevor!" I said, my voice ringing out with crystal clear precision across the manicured lawn. "Please pick up your phone right now. Actually, save your breath. I already called them for you." I stepped forward, moving with deliberate predatory slowness. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute silence in the backyard made every single word ring out like a judge delivering a death sentence. I reached into the sleek leather portfolio tucked under my arm and pulled out a thick stack of documents. I let the heavy folder drop right onto the center of the catered mimosa bar. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the glass table caused Pastor Williams to jolt backward. "You want to talk about providers, Trevor?" I asked, locking my eyes onto his increasingly pale face. "Let us talk about your portfolio. Let us talk about how the brilliant Wall Street executive was fired 8 months ago for gross incompetence and unauthorized trading." A collective gasp rippled through the choir board members. Chloe let out a sharp, breathless squeak, her hands dropping from her pregnant belly to grip the edge of a chair. Trevor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. The arrogant smirk entirely vanished, replaced by the cornered look of a panicked animal. "That is a lie," Trevor stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the folder. "She is making things up because she is jealous. I am an independent contractor now. I day trade." "You day trade," I repeated, stepping so close to him I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. "You gamble. You took the severance package you hid from your pregnant wife and blew it on highly volatile cryptocurrency. You currently owe $150,000 to an offshore syndicate. A syndicate that gave you a hard deadline of Sunday evening to pay up or face violent consequences. That is why you were so desperate to steal a house you never paid a single cent for. You needed the equity to save your own kneecaps." Trevor took a stumbling step backward. Sweat beaded on his forehead, catching the afternoon sunlight. He looked around wildly, realizing that his fraternity brothers and the church deacons were now staring at him with undisguised revulsion. "You are crazy," Trevor spat, though his voice lacked any real volume. "You have absolutely no proof of any of this." I smiled, tapping my manicured fingernail against the top of the dossier. "The proof is right here. Every hidden wallet, every defaulted account, every desperate text message you sent, begging the syndicate for more time. But your gambling debt is just a misdemeanor compared to what you did yesterday." I turned slightly, addressing the crowd, but keeping Trevor directly in my peripheral vision. "Yesterday, my brother-in-law decided to fund his debt by emptying out my autistic son's bedroom. He told you all he sold some dusty junk at a flea market for $3,000. What he actually did was take a fully authenticated 18th century Italian violin, a registered piece of musical history, and fence it to a shadow broker in an underground warehouse." Pastor Williams let out a low groan of horror. Sister Thomas gripped the edge of her floral hat. "That violin," I continued, my voice echoing like steel across the manicured lawn, "was a federally insured artifact valued at $250,000. And the shadow broker you sold it to, Trevor, immediately moved it across the Georgia state line to a shipping port in South Carolina. Do you know what happens when you sell stolen property worth $250,000 and it crosses state lines?" Trevor was hyperventilating now. His chest heaved beneath his expensive linen suit. I did not know, he gasped, completely abandoning his tough guy persona. "I swear I did not know it was worth that much. It was just in a wooden box. It is not my fault." "Ignorance does not negate a federal trafficking charge," I stated flatly. "You crossed into interstate commerce of stolen cultural property. That is a mandatory federal prison sentence." Chloe burst into frantic, hysterical tears. She lunged toward her husband, grabbing his lapels. "Tell me she is lying, Trevor. Tell me you did not sell stolen federal property. Tell me we are not losing the house." I did not give him a chance to answer her. I turned my sights onto the true architect of this disaster. My mother was standing rigidly near the floral archway. Her cream suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. The proud, boastful matriarch who had spent the last 2 hours parading around the yard was completely gone. In her place stood a terrified, calculating woman, watching her entire social empire crumble to dust in front of the very congregation she worshipped. "Do not think you are escaping this, Mom," I said, shifting my gaze directly onto Beatrice. You stood in my driveway and told me I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own home. You told me you used a medical power of attorney to legally transfer my property into Chloe and Trevor's names. Beatrice gripped her pearl necklace, her eyes darting frantically toward Pastor Williams. She whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. We are family. Do not do this in front of the church. We can go inside. We can talk about this privately. You did not want privacy when you threw my son into a windowless basement. I fired back, my voice rising with righteous, unyielding authority. You wanted an audience. You wanted a spectacle. So here is your spectacle. The deed transfer you filed with the county clerk this morning was a complete forgery. I did no such thing, Beatrice shrieked, panic finally overriding her desire to appear composed. I used the legal forms. I had it notarized. I am the matriarch of this family, and I made a financial decision for the betterment of my children. You made a fraudulent decision regarding an asset you never had the right to touch, I corrected her. If you had bothered to actually read the original property records instead of rushing to crown Trevor as the king of the household, you would have known that I do not own this house in my personal name. I transferred the deed into a blind corporate trust 3 years ago. This property belongs to a subsidiary of Aegis Heritage, a multi-million-dollar estate liquidation firm where I serve as the director. Beatrice's mouth fell open. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking hollow and gray. You did not just forge a signature to steal from your daughter, I continued, driving the final nail into her coffin. You forged the signature of a corporate trust officer. You attempted to steal a high-value asset from a registered corporation. And because you filed that paperwork electronically through the county portal, you committed federal wire fraud. I pointed at the lavish party surrounding us. The imported orchids, the caviar, the custom mimosa bar, all of this is happening on corporate property without authorization. You are currently trespassing, Mom. You threw a party on a crime scene. The congregation began to scatter. The deacons quickly backed away from the bar. Sister Thomas grabbed her purse and practically sprinted toward the side gate, entirely unwilling to be associated with a federal fraud investigation. The beautiful high society baby shower had instantly transformed into a zone of absolute radioactive panic. Beatrice snapped. The complete irrevocable destruction of her social standing combined with the terrifying reality of federal prison shattered her fragile grip on reality. She let out a guttural, furious scream that sounded barely human. She lunged forward, raising her hand high into the air, her fingers curled like claws, aiming a violent, desperate slap directly at my face. You ungrateful, lying wretch, she roared. I did not flinch. I did not even raise my hands to block her. Because right at that exact second, before her hand could strike my cheek, an absolutely deafening ear-shattering siren ripped through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Beatrice's arm froze mid-air. Trevor spun around in sheer terror. The remaining guests froze in their tracks. 3 massive black armored SUVs tore up the driveway, their tires tearing through the immaculate front lawn. They slammed into a tactical formation right at the edge of the backyard patio. The heavy reinforced doors of the vehicles kicked open simultaneously, and a dozen federal agents wearing tactical gear and bulletproof vests swarmed the property. The flashing red and blue lights painted the white party tent in harsh, frantic strokes of color, signaling the absolute end of the line. The deafening roar of the sirens shattered the heavy Atlanta heat. The pristine, freshly manicured lawn of the front yard was instantly torn to shreds as 3 massive black armored SUVs slammed on their brakes, tearing deep trenches into the grass. The sheer force of their arrival sent a shockwave of absolute terror through the 70 guests trapped in the backyard. The flashing red and blue strobe lights cut violently through the elegant white party tent, casting harsh, frantic shadows over the terrified faces of the First Baptist Choir Board. Tactical boots hit the pavement with synchronized military precision. Over a dozen federal agents clad in heavy Kevlar vests, with the letters FBI emblazoned across their chests in stark yellow, swarmed the property from every conceivable angle. They moved with a lethal, terrifying efficiency, bypassing the floral archways and the overturned trays of caviar. Panic erupted instantly. Sister Thomas let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her designer clutch into a puddle of spilled champagne as she scrambled backward. Pastor Williams froze entirely, his jaw slack, his hands raised in the air as if he were trying to surrender to heaven itself. The wealthy deacons who just minutes ago had been hanging on to Trevor's every word practically trampled each other trying to back away from the custom mimosa bar. The smooth jazz had been entirely replaced by the sharp, authoritative barks of federal agents ordering everyone to stay exactly where they were. My mother was paralyzed. The hand she had raised to slap my face just seconds prior fell limply to her side, trembling violently. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified woman watching her meticulously crafted illusion of high society get dismantled by federal authorities in real time. I did not move a single inch. I stood perfectly still in my emerald silk suit, holding Malik's small hand securely in mine. My son remained perfectly calm, his noise-canceling headphones completely shielding him from the auditory chaos, allowing him to watch the flashing lights like a silent, fascinating light show. I was the absolute unbothered eye of the hurricane. Special Agent Vance strode through the sliding glass doors, his badge held high and visible for the entire yard to see. He did not look at the screaming church members. He did not look at my mother. His eyes were locked dead onto the pale, sweating face of my brother-in-law. Trevor had backed himself against the outdoor kitchen counter, his knuckles white as he gripped the granite edge. The arrogant, wealthy Wall Street savior persona had evaporated completely. He looked exactly like what he truly was, a cornered, desperate fraud. Trevor Agent Vance's voice boomed across the patio, slicing through the hysterical sobs of the guests. You are under arrest for the interstate trafficking of stolen federal cultural property, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Keep your hands where I can see them and step away from the counter. Trevor's knees physically buckled. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost standing under the bright summer sun. He raised his hands, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. "Wait," he stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "There is a misunderstanding. You do not understand. I just sold some old junk from a closet. It was just a wooden box. I did not know it was federal property. I swear to God I did not know." Ignorance of a $250,000 asset is not a legal defense against interstate trafficking, Vance stated coldly, signaling for two heavily armed agents to move in and flank the sweating man. "We have the GPS tracking data, the digital footprint of your offshore gambling debts, and the verified testimony of the shadow broker in South Carolina who flipped on you 20 minutes ago. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The reality of a federal prison sentence crashed down on Trevor with the weight of a freight train. The man who had demanded I refer to him as the head of the household, the man who had locked a black woman and her autistic child in a damp basement just to secure his own comfort, completely broke down. He dropped to his knees right there on the expensive stone patio, ignoring the sharp edges biting into his tailored linen pants. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat pouring from his forehead. He began to sob, a loud, ugly, humiliating sound that echoed across the silent watching congregation. "Please," Trevor begged, turning his frantic, tear-filled eyes toward his wife. "Chloe, baby, you have to help me. Tell them it was your mother's house. Tell them Beatrice told me to clear out the room. I just needed the money for the smart crib. I did it for our baby. You have to tell them I am a good man. Please, Chloe, call a lawyer. Call someone. Do not let them take me." He reached a shaking hand out toward the hem of her expensive spun silk maternity gown. He expected her to fall to her knees beside him to play the devoted, supportive wife he had purchased with stolen money. He expected her to shield him with her pregnant belly and fight for their fabricated love story. Instead, Chloe looked down at the pathetic crying man on the ground, and pure, unfiltered self-preservation took over. She looked at the heavily armed federal agents, then at the horrified faces of Pastor Williams and the church elders. She realized in a fraction of a second that being tied to a federal criminal would completely destroy the only thing she actually cared about: her social status and her own freedom. "Get away from me!" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of loyalty. She violently kicked her foot out, knocking Trevor's reaching hand away from her expensive dress. She stumbled backward, pressing herself against the brick wall of the house, as if Trevor had suddenly contracted a lethal disease. "Do not you dare touch me. I do not know anything about any stolen violin. I did not sell anything. You are a liar and a criminal. I thought you worked on Wall Street. You lied to me about everything." Trevor stared up at his wife in absolute devastating shock. The woman he had stolen for the woman he had bullied me for was throwing him to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. But babe, he whimpered, tears coating his chin. I did this for us. I did this to give you the lifestyle you wanted. You knew I was broke. You knew it. I do not know you, Chloe shrieked, waving her manicured hands frantically at Agent Vance. Officer, take him away. He lied to my family. He manipulated my poor mother. I am a pregnant woman. I am completely innocent. Get this criminal out of my yard. The sheer ruthlessness of her betrayal hung in the humid air. Trevor was utterly destroyed, completely abandoned by the very people who had worshipped him just 10 minutes prior. His sobs reduced to ragged, hyperventilating gasps as he slumped forward, fully surrendering to his own ruin. Agent Vance did not show a single ounce of pity. He grabbed Trevor by the collar of his expensive stolen linen suit and hauled him roughly to his feet. He twisted Trevor's arms behind his back with practiced mechanical efficiency. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Trevor's wrists echoed loudly across the patio. It was the sound of a life ending. You have the right to remain silent. Vance recited calmly, his voice, a stark contrast to the hysterical sobbing of the man he was detaining. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Two agents grabbed Trevor by the biceps and began dragging him forcefully across the manicured lawn, right past the terrified church members and the overturned trays of luxury appetizers. Trevor dragged his feet, his head hanging low, sobbing uncontrollably, as he was paraded in front of the entire community he had tried so desperately to impress. The white Wall Street savior was being hauled away like common street trash, his reputation entirely incinerated. I stood perfectly still in my emerald green suit, my posture impeccable, watching the agents shove the crying man into the back of the armored black SUV. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing Trevor inside the dark, inescapable reality of his own making. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy. I felt only the clean, sharp satisfaction of absolute justice. But the federal raid was not over. The symphony of destruction had only just finished its first movement. I turned my gaze slowly away from the departing vehicles and locked eyes with my mother. Beatrice was trembling violently, her chest heaving, as she stared at the empty space where her prized son-in-law had just been standing. She had not yet realized that the trap I had built was designed to catch more than one rat. The heavy steel doors of the federal transport vehicle slammed shut, echoing across the torn lawn like a final, unmistakable judgment. The red and blue strobe lights continued to bounce off the white canvas of the party tent, painting the horrified faces of the First Baptist congregation in alternating shades of panic. Trevor was gone, locked in the back of an armored SUV, his arrogant Wall Street persona completely incinerated. I stood perfectly still, the emerald silk of my suit catching the flashing lights, my grip on Malik's hand gentle but firm. My son was completely safe, his noise-canceling headphones keeping the chaotic reality of the world at bay. For a breathless moment, the entire backyard was frozen. Then the paralysis gripping my mother finally shattered. Beatrice spun around, her eyes wild and bloodshot, frantically searching the devastated patio until her gaze locked onto me. The polished, untouchable matriarch, who had spent the afternoon bragging to Pastor Williams, was entirely obliterated. In her place was a terrified, desperate woman, watching her pristine social empire collapse into a federal crime scene. She lunged forward, her expensive high heels slipping on the wet grass where overturned champagne glasses lay shattered. She practically threw herself at me, completely abandoning every ounce of the vicious pride she had carried just 10 minutes ago. She reached out with both hands, her manicured fingers digging desperately into the silk sleeve of my blazer. Maya, Beatrice gasped, her voice a ragged, hysterical wheeze. Maya, you have to stop them. You have to fix this right now. You are the director of that company. You have money. You know lawyers. Go talk to that federal agent. Tell him this is a huge misunderstanding. Tell him Trevor was just helping you manage your assets. We are family, Maya. We are a family. You cannot let them take your sister's husband away. I looked down at her hands gripping my arm. I did not raise my voice. I did not break my posture. I simply ripped my arm backward with such sudden violent force that Beatrice stumbled forward, her knees hitting the hard stone of the patio. "Do not you ever dare touch me again," I stated, my voice echoing like a crack of thunder across the silent yard. Beatrice looked up at me from the ground, her chest heaving, tears ruining her immaculate makeup. "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed, looking around frantically at the church elders, who were watching her humiliation in real time. "Chloe is pregnant. She needs her husband. We are Black women, Maya. The system is already built against us. We have to protect our own. You cannot let the federal government destroy your own blood." I let out a harsh, bone-chilling laugh that made Pastor Williams take a physical step backward. "Protect our own," I repeated, the absolute disgust radiating from every syllable. "Do not you dare try to weaponize our race or our community to cover up your grotesque greed. You did not care about protecting our own this morning. You looked at my brilliant, beautiful, neurodivergent Black son and called him an abnormal burden. You dragged him out of his safe space and shoved him into a dark, damp basement so you could build a luxury nursery for a white man who despises you." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was suffocating under the weight of her own exposed hypocrisy. "You worshipped Trevor," I continued, my voice carrying mercilessly over the hushed crowd. "You bowed down to him because of his skin color and a fake finance degree. You let an unemployed racist gambling addict walk all over your own flesh and blood because you were so utterly desperate for the validation of the white upper class. You thought showing him off to the church would make you royalty. You sacrificed your own grandson on the altar of your pathetic vanity." Chloe was still sprawled on the grass a few feet away, her designer maternity gown stained with dirt and spilled wine. She pounded her fists against the ground like a petulant toddler throwing a tantrum. "Mom, make her fix it," Chloe wailed, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was currently being processed for federal trafficking. "She is rich. Tell her to write a check. I cannot lose this house. I already posted the property tour on my social media. What am I going to tell my followers?" I turned my piercing gaze down to my sister. "You are going to tell your followers that you are homeless, Chloe. You are going to tell them that the luxury penthouse you thought you were moving into was seized because Trevor stopped paying rent 4 months ago. You are going to tell them that every single designer outfit you are wearing was bought on fraudulent credit cards opened in your name. Your husband did not just steal from my son, he bankrupted you." Chloe stopped crying instantly. Her mouth fell open in mute absolute horror as the reality of her financial ruin finally penetrated her thick skull. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking so violently her diamond bracelets rattled. "Maya, please," she begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic broken whisper. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I sacrificed everything for you. You have made your point. You humiliated us in front of the pastor. You won. Now please, I am begging you, withdraw the charges. Give us the deed to the house. I will never ask you for anything ever again. Just let us keep our dignity." "Dignity?" I asked, staring at her with eyes completely devoid of mercy. "You lost your dignity the day you forged my signature to drain $50,000 from my college savings account. You lost it when you smiled and cheered while Trevor sold my dead husband's violin to a black market smuggler. You threw a catered party on a federal crime scene, Mom. You brought the entire church congregation here to celebrate the fact that you stole my property." I turned slightly, addressing the terrified church members who were clinging to the edges of the patio. "My mother invited you all here today to show off her wealth," I announced clearly. "Let me tell you exactly how she acquired it. She logged into a county portal this morning and submitted a forged medical document to illegally transfer the deed of a multi-million-dollar corporate property into her favorite daughter's name. She thought she was a criminal mastermind." Pastor Williams gasped, covering his mouth with his hand. Sister Thomas let out a loud, judgmental groan, shaking her head in absolute disgust. The social empire Beatrice had spent decades building evaporated into nothingness in the span of 30 seconds. The people she had desperately tried to impress were looking at her like she was a monster. Beatrice spun around, looking at the judging faces of her peers. "No," she cried out, her voice cracking with pure panic. "She is lying. She is a bitter, jealous child. I am a good Christian woman. I tithe every Sunday. Pastor, you know my heart. I was just trying to secure a future for my grandchild. No one stepped forward to comfort her. No one offered a prayer or a hand of support. They looked at her with the cold, unyielding judgment of a community that had just been used as props in a massive illegal fraud. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling the last remaining invisible string of obligations sever completely. You have spent 32 years telling me I was a disappointment, Mom. You told me my career was a joke. You told me my child was a burden. But today you get to learn a very hard, very public lesson about who actually holds the power in this family. Beatrice's eyes darted wildly. She was hyperventilating, the panic attack fully seizing her chest. She took a step toward the sliding glass doors, desperately trying to escape the judging eyes, trying to run back inside the stolen house to hide. She did not make it 2 steps. A tall, broad-shouldered federal agent stepped directly into her path, blocking the doorway. He was not wearing a tactical vest, but a sharp, dark suit. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded, heavily stamped document. Beatrice Williams, the agent stated, his voice ringing with absolute terrifying legal authority. Beatrice froze, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the federal badge clipped to his belt. I have a federal warrant for your arrest. The agent continued, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his back pocket. You are being charged with 1 count of real estate fraud, 1 count of forging a corporate trust document, and 1 count of felony wire fraud for utilizing interstate servers to submit falsified property deeds. Beatrice let out a high, piercing shriek that tore through the humid air. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror.